we are now going to switch to Zanele. So we're going from Durban back to the Kruger National Park. Zanele is responsible for the control of the invasive plant species in the Kruger National Park. Zanele, without any further words from my side, over to you.
So before I get to monitoring and evaluation, I just want to touch briefly on why invasive alien plants are such an important issue in protected areas. Imagine if we stopped managing invasive alien species in the Kruger National Park. What would happen? These plants will spread in the park. They will cause a lot of environmental and economic impact. So within a few years, we'll see loss of biodiversity, reduction in terms of water availability. We'll see an increase in fires, a reduction in grazing, tourism value, and as a result, we'll have to spend millions of rands trying to recover the ecosystem. So by the end of this presentation, I'm hoping that you will be able to confidently answer the following questions. What is monitoring and evaluation and why does it matter? How do monitoring and evaluation support better conservation decisions? What should protected area managers monitor and evaluate? And how do we measure management success beyond hectares treated? And how can monitoring and evaluation improve invasive alien plant management? And also, what lessons can we learn from the practical examples from the Kruger National Park? So when people hear you talk about invasive alien plants, many just immediately think of unwanted vegetation or see it as weed. But invasive alien species are one of the biggest threats to biodiversity. And this is not only a Kruger problem, but it's a national problem, but it's also a global problem. So we'll ask the question, why do we have to monitor and evaluate? And the reason is that protected area managers are often left with the responsibility of having to make a decision. So we need to decide what should be treated first, what methods are effective. We need to look at the resources that we have available. So monitoring and evaluation helps us as managers to make sure that our work does not become guesswork, but it's supported by evidence. So I'm just going to now zoom into monitoring and evaluation in terms of defining it. I'm going to start with monitoring first. You're using an example of Klip Riversberg Nature Reserve with specific reference to Ficus indica. Monitoring is a regular and systematic observation and recording of invasive alien plant population, control activities, and ecosystem response. So when you plan for monitoring, it's important that you define your objectives, you select your monitoring sites, you choose or decide on the indicators that you're going to use, and how often are you going to do the monitoring. And you look at the tools that you're going to use or that are available at your disposal, and also the various resources. So in reference to the example that we're using here of Ficus indica, we will then record the exact location where the plant is being found, or within the unit or a block. You can use a GPS device to do so. You also record the date in which you take the observations. You look at the presence or the density cover of the particular species. And where possible or practical, you'll also take a picture of the species. So, and this enables you to be able to gather data that will assist you at the later stage to be able to monitor what has happened in the site. So there are various tools that are available out there that protected area managers can use. Here, I just make reference to Survey 123 and a Cyber Tracker. So now that we've got an understanding of monitoring, I'm just going to go into evaluation. And evaluation is a systematic assessment of monitoring results to determine if management actions are achieving the intended outcome and how to improve future decisions. So monitoring provides the evidence, but then what evaluation does, it interprets the evidence. So in this particular case, again, we're evaluating efficacy indica over a period of time. So we're looking at a period from 2022 to 2024. So what we want to see is, has there been a reduction in terms of the density in the area? Has there been any changes in the ecosystem? We also look at the resources that we invested there. Have they been used, efficiently? So from the data that you collect from monitoring, you are able to also draw graphs that enable you to be able to interpret what has happened on that particular site. So you're able to look at, even from the photos, you're able to look at the before and after scenario, before how the site looked like, and after how the site looks like after you've implemented your control measures. So evaluation then also assists you in terms of looking at how you've utilized your resources, the resources that were available from a financial point of view, your material, your labor. So you're able to make a deduction if were the investments worth it. So your interpretation, we looked at what worked well, what didn't work, and it was the overall effectiveness out of the investment that you made there. So in this particular example, I say there was a 50% reduction in Opunja infestation on the particular site. So you're able to see what were the results on the site based on the investment that you make. And from there on, then we are able to also adapt strategies and decide whether how are you going to allocate resources or introduce some improvements into your implementation. So now that we've looked at monitoring and evaluation separately, let's bring them together. So monitoring collects information, evaluation interprets information, monitoring measures progress, evaluation measures success. And monitoring is continuous, but evaluation is periodic. Monitoring focuses on outputs, while evaluation focuses on outcomes and impacts. So monitoring answers what happened, and evaluation answers why did it happen. So monitoring generates data, while evaluation helps management in supporting their decision making. So now in this next slide, I just want to show you where the process starts, where you're collecting your data from monitoring. It goes into maybe a database where you're managing your data. So you use that data, you analyze it so that you can get your results. From the results that you've received, then you are able to make a decision as a manager. So you're able to make an informed decision or a decision that is based on evidence. And from there on, you can also then implement adaptive management. So there's no point in collecting data, evaluating it, and keeping it in a database. Then that means you are not creating value out of the data that you've collected. So the data that you collect, you want to make sure that it assists you or influence the decisions that you make as managers. So the data that you collect should assist you also in presenting your case to also senior management. So then this illustrates that the data that you collect from M&E is able to also assist you to make a decision as a manager. So we've had a few speakers talk about adaptive management. We know environment changes, fires come in, we've got new invasions that come into the system. So that means management cannot do things the same way they've been doing. So what is required from management is that management then needs to adapt. Management needs to adapt also based on what they've learned from the implementation, from the data that they collected at monitoring, from evaluation as well, and introduce improvement into their management. So let me just take you a step back. So monitoring and evaluation do not just exist in isolation, but they also form part of the invasive alien species management framework, which includes a planning phase, you've got an implementation phase, you've got a learning or recovery phase. So it's not in isolation, and you actually find monitoring and evaluation at almost each and every steps that are involved in the invasive alien species management framework. So, yeah, before you start with your invasive alien species management, or before you even spend any money or invest resources, it is important that you to conduct a baseline assessment. Example, you will never know if the patient condition has improved at a later stage if you did not check the patient's conditions initially. So the data that you collect at the baseline assessment is data that helps you in at a later stage to be able to interpret your data. So a baseline assessment provides the starting points against which future management decisions can be measured. So it can look at things like which species are present on that particular area, the distribution, density, the area that invaded. You look at ecosystems that are affected and also existing pathways. Now I'm going to bring it to another concept of risk assessment. And why do managers have to conduct a risk assessment, and what does it does? Risk assessment evaluates the likelihood of introduction of a particular species, the likelihood that the species would establish, the rate at which it can do so, and the potential impacts that the species will have on the ecosystem. So now I'm just going to go into a practical example so that I illustrate the concept of risk assessment. So in this particular case, I'm using an example of kuzu vine, which is occurring along the Sabi river system. So when you conduct your risk assessment, you look at firstly the conservation value. So you've got a scoring system there from 1 to 5. So we know that this particular species within the Kruger Park, it's occurring within the riparian zone. So then we'll give it a score of 5. Then we look at the invasive alien species abundance. At the moment, it's currently a small patch localized. It's in fact an early detection rapid response species. So then you'll give it a score of a 2 or a 3. And then next you'll move on, you look at the potential of spread. You know, a kutu vine is a rapid climber and also has an ability to reproduce quite and spread quite extensively. So then you give it for potential spread, we'll give it a score of 5, which is very high. In terms of the ecological impact, we know that where it comes in, it covers indigenous vegetation. So then the potential of ecological impact becomes severe. So we give it a score of 5. And also feasibility of eradication. Now, I've already indicated that it's an EDRR species. It's an early detection rapid response. So we give it a 5. So if you add up those numbers, you come to a score of 22 over 25. So which gives it a rating of very high. So then you would use this a calculation to justify as to why you should invest resources into that particular space. Now I'm going to move on onto prevention. This is also one of the early stages in the invasive alien species management framework. The concept of prevention is that preventing an invasion is significantly more effective and less expensive than controlling an established population. So what you want to do, you want to try and prevent an infestation before it establish in the reserve or in a particular area. So, and how you would do that, you conduct surveillance. This can be done by also field rangers during their patrols. You can also use citizen science, and what you can also do to prevent a species from spreading. Simple acts of cleaning, vehicles or cleaning of mud from a grader can help to prevent an invasive species from being spread. And also just creating awareness as well to staff and also the public, and also regularly inspecting your nursery to ensure that no prohibited species are being sold at nurseries. Another operation that's also critical to monitor within protected areas is construction operations. It's important that you constantly monitor where these vehicles are moving in and also where they're collecting, if quarry is being moved from one section to another. So you need to be hands-on as a conservation manager or as an invasive alien species manager to make sure that you influence that process, because that can also bring in new species that you don't want. So if you're able to prevent a species from spreading, then you're able to cut out a lot of cost that you would have incurred later on. I know many of times we often celebrate hectares that we've cleared, but it's never a situations where we celebrate species that never even entered our systems. So now sometimes it's not possible to prevent species from entering a protected area. Then what then you need to do, you need to implement the early detection and rapid response, which is the most cost-effective strategy for managing invasive alien plants after prevention. So you want to try and control a population while it's still small, because once it becomes large, then it becomes costly to control. I'm going to make reference to an example of pom-pom weed. This particular weed, we do not have it in the park yet, but it's already recorded in some areas around the park. So this species is automatically included into our IS watch list. So during routine patrols, field rangers look out for it. Even staff, when we conduct awareness campaigns with staff, we ensure that staff are trained even on how to identify the species and also what steps they should follow if they pick it up, because now the goal is to make sure that we get into that species before it spreads and becomes a huge problem in the park. So another a thing that's also important when it comes to surveillance or early detection and rapid response is working very closely with your neighbors, people that are surrounding your park, because then it helps. You've got eyes, in different areas. So you're also able again together to detect new species that are coming in. You work together to make sure that you control them before they become a big problems. So in terms of early detection and rapid response, I've already spoken about training of staff. These are some of the steps that you will take. So when you detect a new species, you will report it, or you ask rangers that when they detect a species, they report it, and you confirm identity. This can be in a form of a photograph, them sending photos. But if there's a new species, it's a new species that you also don't know as a conservation manager. You can also send, specimens into experts who are able to verify the species for you. So you conduct a rapid assessment and you plan for response, you implement response. And it doesn't end there. You still go back again, monitor and evaluate to make sure that the species has either been eradicated or is being contained in that particular space. Again, here I make reference to Pereskia, which is also a species that we do not have in the park yet, but there are areas where it's been reported outside of the park. So often protected area managers do not have sufficient resources to deal with the problem that they have at hand. So this then brings into the next concept of prioritization. So it's important that the limited resources that we have as protected area managers, we make sure that we get the best value out of it, because it's impossible to cover every infestation. I think even the previous speakers touched on that sometimes we need to make a choice between species and see which ones are priority. So in your prioritization, you'll also look at aspects such as high conservation value, the stage of invasion, the feasibility of control, how easy is it to control that species, and then how much resources do we have available. So in the next slide, I just illustrate an invasive alien species prioritization framework that protected area managers can use to prioritize for which species or areas to deal with. So Nicholas spoke in great details about risk assessment and pathway, analysis. So once you've identified the species that you are dealing with in the park, then you will decide on, on your side prioritization. You'll also look at the resources that you have available, and then you then say, is it a high priority species, medium or low priority species? Obviously, the high priority species will take, precedence. So you go ahead and then implement the control based on that. So there are various control methods that are available to managers to manage invasive alien species. I'm not going to go into this. I think Waldorf covered these methods in great details. But maybe what I can just say is that sometimes you can use a different methods combined. So this is what we call integrated integrated control methods. So in the different control methods, your monitoring will not be the same because the methods are different. For example, when you're monitoring for chemical control, you look at things like regrowth, resprouting, or maybe coppicing from the plant that you've controlled. You look at, do you require follow-up? And then if you're monitoring for chemical control, for instance, you look at the plant mortality. Has the herbicide been effective? Were there no damage to non-targeted plants? And if you're monitoring for biological control, for instance, you look at establishment of the agent, the spread of the agent, damage to the host plant. But it's important to know that when you are dealing with biological control, it's a slow process. So you need to be very patient. It takes time to see results, but in most cases, once it starts working, you do reap the value for money from investing in biological control. So it differs from species to species. So, one method might be the best for one species, but might not be the best for another species. I think what I would also like to emphasize with regards to biological control, I think Wadov, or is it Nicholas, touched on this, that it's important that when you've identified your biological control sites, you need to make sure that you protect them from other methods being implemented. Example, prevent teams from going in and spraying a plot or areas where you've released biological control. So, as a manager, if you want to be able to see if you're making progress or results, it's important that you have a specific objective that you've set. So you can use what we call the SMART indicators. So the example that I'm using here, I'm saying the goal is to effectively manage Parthenium in our ecosystem. So what the SMART indicator says, it says your goal must be specific. So in this particular case, we're saying we want to reduce Parthenium cover. It must be measurable. So you can say, I want to reduce the infestation maybe from 60% to 20%, and also look at how is that goal actually achievable? Are you able to do that within the resources that you have available? Because there's no point in setting a goal that you will not be able to achieve within the resources that you have available. And it also must be relevant within the system that you're working in. And it also must have a time frame. So saying within a space of, let's say, 5 years or 10 years, I want to see this reduction. So, and then another aspect that is also of important is that when we implement invasive alien species management, we also want to see if the ecosystems that we are working on are recovering, or are they deteriorating even, further? This brings in the issue of monitoring for ecosystem recovery. The two images that I've used in this particular slide, the before picture was before we introduced or before biological control was introduced in a particular site in the Kruger National Park, and the second picture just shows how the system recovered. And I just want to emphasize in this particular case is that no planting or introduction of seed was done, but the system was able to recover itself after management or biological control was introduced. So M&E can also help us in ensuring that we comply, with we align with legislation. And how can M&E assist us? It is by ensuring that we are legal compliance from a permit point of view, ensuring that we're able to provide evidence. If DFFE or auditors come, then we're able to provide them with evidence. And also it assists in terms of us making decisions, and also from an accountability and transparency point of view. And also in terms of justifying why we have changed the way we are doing things. So monitoring and evaluation is important from a legislation point of view. So there's various tools that are available that managers can use for monitoring and evaluation. But I think what I would say in this particular case, I think it's important that you use a system that's within your means, or that's practical to the area that you're working in, and that it's achievable, because there's no point in going, for example, selecting that you're going to use a drone, but you know that within the space that you're operating in, the resources that you have available, you will not be able to sustain such a system. So whatever system that you adopt must be a system that is sustainable within the environment. And also just going back to simple monitoring tools such as the clipboard and a paper and a simple GPS, it still works. So you don't need a fancy system to be able to implement monitoring within your reserve or your space of operation. So now that I've covered what monitoring and evaluation is, now I'm just going to go through some of the practical examples from the Kruger National Park. I'm going to go back to Kutu again. I've indicated it's an emerging weed in the Kruger National Park. So when you do monitoring, it's important that you also understand the biology of the plant. So we know what is a perennial climbing legume, and where it comes from, how it behaves. It smooths vegetation and other trees, reduces biodiversity, and affects access and tourism experience. So the next phase will be then to determine it's to how the extent of impact is. So then you would then collect your data or estimate your infestation within the system or along the river. So in this particular case, I make an example of a Gutu vine infestation of 30%, and a standard of 20 per person days per hectare if we're using mechanical control to control this particular species. So you also need to understand the age class of the species that we're dealing with and at what stage we are in. So in this particular example, we're working in this area for the first time, so I'm going to call it an initial infestation. So monitoring then helps you to be able to prevent a further spread of the species, and also it helps you to be able to determine resources that you need in order to work that species, or also to prevent that species from becoming a greater problem. So how this assists with resource planning is that you've got your standards now. You know, okay, generally to manually control the species in a 1 hectare area at 100% density, you'd need 20% days per hectare. But in this particular case, when we assess it, we determine that infestation per hectare is 30%. So then if we do our calculations, if we say 20% days by 30, which is our infestation, our density, then it comes to 6% days per hectare. So you're able to determine that, oh, okay, I'm going to need 6% days per hectare to be able to clear this species. So if I'm using 6% days per hectare, though, that means those 6 people will be able to cover that area in 1 day. For instance, I only have 3 people, then that means I'm going to need 2 days, because now then that means you're going to need 2 days. If I've got 3 people, to be able to make up the 6 person days that you require per hectare. So again, with monitoring, you're also able to determine what else do I need, your tools, your PPE, and if you need to move the waste or the biomass from the site. So you also need to determine the transport resources that you need. So this is just an example that illustrates how data you collect from monitoring assists you as a manager. So I'm going to move on to the second example, which looks at now it's an aquatic system. The first example was a terrestrial. This one is an aquatic system, which is water hyacinth. And here we've already released the biological control agent. But now what we want to know is that how is the agent doing? Is it attacking the plant? Is it doing what we expecting it to do? Is the agent spreading from where we've released it to the other areas? So what we then assess, we assess the establishment success of this Neocortina brucei, which is the agent that we release in this particular system. We looked for signs of scarring, if there are any petals that have been mined. We want to see if is the plant being weakened, and we also want to see if the agent is spreading. So, and how does this assist us again from a management point of view? So, monitoring data collected provides evidence on agents establishment, damage, and plant response. So, from this data, we are able to analyze it, evaluate it. So, you compare data over time against our objectives, and then we're also able to decide on the next action as to what should we do next. Should we release release another agent, or do we just continue monitoring? This is my last example refers to Cylindropucha imbricata, which is found in one of the sections, again in the Kruger National Park. Here we released biological control, Dactylopias tomentosus, it's cochineal. So now we're looking at an example from now a time frame of December 2025 where we released the agent, and then we did a post 6 months released in June. So in the post 6 months release, we determined a scoring system that we are going to use, because it's important again in monitoring and evaluation that you need to have a set scoring system that you're going to follow. And again, it's important that the scoring system that you follow, when you come back again, you are consistent, because then it allows you to compare data over a period of time. Because if you change your scoring system, then it becomes difficult then to compare the trend over time. So in this particular site, then we're looking at the establishment of the cochineal and also to see if there were any damages. So we had site 1, we had site 2 as well. So what we got from the data that we collected from monitoring was that establishment on site 1 was 100%, but establishment on site 2 was 69.2%. So after 6 months evaluation, cochineal establishment was evident at both sites, but site 1 showed a stronger establishment and higher visible impact. And how does this help you then as a protected area manager, or how it helped us? So we can decide that, okay, maybe we want to do a supplementary release on site 2, or we're just going to continue monitoring. Remember, biological control takes time, so we just need to give it time for it to work, in the system. So this is just shows example as to how monitoring and evaluation can assist you as a manager to make a sound and evidence-based decision. So monitoring and evaluation is not a one department's function. I think one of the speakers also touched on this. It's not something that as an invasive alien species unit you can do alone, but you need to work with other colleagues within the organization, or also even with institutions outside of the organization. You've got researchers, you've got academic institutions that we can work with. I've just listed some of the key partners that we work with as Kruger National Park ISP with when it comes to monitoring and evaluation. So these are different partners. They assist us from an expert point of view, but they also assist in terms of providing of biological control agents, and also in terms of analyzing or doing even detailed research work that we do not have the capacity to do within Sun Parks or Kruger, so they're able to bring in those expertise. But even within Kruger itself, we've got different departments. We've got the scientific services, we've got biosecurity, the BSP programs, which are involved in most of the implementation, but they also collect data that helps us with decision making. We've got the socio-economic transformation department, which also looks at the social outcomes of the implementation of the programs that we roll out. We also have volunteers. I think Waldorf also touched on volunteers and and other stakeholders that are important. So you cannot work alone as a manager, but you also need to have collaboration with other institutions. So yeah, if we were to be honest, I mean, and most of us as conservation managers, we all face, certain challenges when it comes to monitoring and evaluation, and most of them are actually quite, quite similar. And in some instances, these challenges often make some protected area managers see a monitoring and evaluation as an impossible, process. But I've indicated earlier on, but that sometimes just using simple tools enables you to be able to implement monitoring and evaluation using the resources that you have available at your disposal. And there's no perfect monitoring system. It's a continuous improvement a system. So you also learn as you go about doing it. So you cannot say, I'm not going to implement monitoring because I've got these limitations. So you work with what you have available at your disposal. So the key take-home messages is that monitoring provides evidence, evaluation transforms evidence into knowledge, adaptive management improves conservation outcomes, and prevention is guided by risk assessment and supported by EDR is the most cost-effective strategy. And healthy ecosystems require long-term commitment. And one of the speakers did also touch on this, is that when you're dealing with ecosystems, the recovery, it does not happen overnight. You need to give it time to be able to see the results. So just as a reflection, so as a protected area manager, the question is, how would you know your program is successful? Would you measure the hectares you've treated? Would you measure biodiversity recovery? Would you measure the cost or the resources you've invested? Or would you measure ecosystem health and function? Or would you measure community benefits? So remember, what we choose to measure influences what we manage. Thank you so much.
Zanele, thank you so much. Your last slide was particularly powerful as it really speaks to what you think conservation is. And today was really, honestly, one of the best explanations. It was really a fascinating lecture. Thank you.